John Miller had always believed that life was meant to be simple. He was a man of routine, waking up early every morning to tend to his small garden, making coffee in his favorite blue mug, and reading the newspaper on the porch before the world got busy. He lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where neighbors greeted each other with smiles, and the hum of daily life felt steady and reassuring. John's house wasn't big, but it was his. The front lawn was neat, the flowers in the garden bloomed in orderly rows, and the walkway leading to the door was always swept clean. For years, he had taken pride in keeping everything in its place. He liked predictability, and the idea that he could create a small corner of the world where things felt right gave him a sense of peace. On one ordinary Tuesday morning, John was sipping his coffee and reading the local newspaper when he noticed an envelope resting against his door. It wasn't unusual. Letters from neighbors, bills, and occasional advertisements were part of daily life, but this envelope had the letters HOA stamped clearly at the top. John frowned. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was notorious in their neighborhood for being strict. They had rules for everything: how tall the grass could grow, what color the mailbox could be, even how far a garden gnome could be placed from the sidewalk. John had never had a serious problem with them, but he always approached their letters with a cautious eye. He set down his coffee and opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly typed notice: "Dear Mr. Miller, it has come to our attention that your trash can was not placed correctly for collection. A fine of $5 has been applied to your account. Please resolve this matter immediately to avoid further action." John blinked. $5. He read it again to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. $5 for a trash can? The absurdity of it made him chuckle, though he couldn't help feeling a twinge of frustration. He was meticulous about following rules. He had even taken a picture of the trash can outside, perfectly aligned with the curb, just in case. He set the letter down and leaned back in his chair. $5, he muttered to himself. Really? Despite the small amount, a knot of worry formed in his stomach. He knew that in the world of the HOA, fines were not always about the money, they were about control. One small fine could easily turn into a series of fines, letters, and inspections that could make life stressful for months. John had seen it happen to others in the neighborhood. For the next hour, he pondered what to do. Should he call them? Should he pay it and move on? He didn't want to make waves, but something about the tone of the letter rubbed him the wrong way. It wasn't just a notice, it felt like an accusation, a small but pointed reminder that someone was watching him. As he sat there, he thought about his family. His son, Mark, had returned home a few months earlier after serving overseas. Mark was different now, calm, disciplined, and strong, but John knew that his son had been through experiences that had changed him in ways he couldn't fully understand. Still, Mark had always been protective of his father, and John felt a quiet reassurance knowing his son was nearby. John decided to put the matter aside for the day. He went about his routine, mowing the lawn, trimming the hedges, and watering the flowers. Even the small task of caring for his garden brought him a sense of calm. The world outside could be petty and chaotic, but here, in his little garden, things made sense. That evening, as he was washing the dishes after dinner, his phone rang. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Harper, a sweet elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. "John, did you get a letter from the HOA?" she asked. Her voice was tinged with concern. "Yes," John replied. "A fine for $5. Can you believe it?" "Oh, I've heard about that," she said. "They've been very strict lately. Small fines, inspections, it's getting out of hand." John sighed. I just don't understand why they make such a big deal over something so trivial. They like to show that they're in charge, Mrs. Harper said gently. Just be careful, John. Sometimes they push too far. After hanging up, John felt a shiver of unease. He had always trusted that people would act reasonably, but the Hoa had a reputation for doing the opposite. What started as a $5 fine could easily turn into something more stressful, and he had no intention of letting that happen in his home. The next morning, John's anxiety grew. He kept thinking about the fine, replaying the letter in his mind, imagining the Hoa representatives coming to his door. He didn't want confrontation, but he wanted to protect his home, his space, and his peace of mind. Mark noticed his father's unease. Dad, what's wrong? He asked as he walked into the kitchen. His voice was calm, but there was an alertness in his eyes that made John pause. Mark had a presence about him that commanded attention without needing to raise his voice. It's nothing, John said quickly, not wanting to worry him. But Mark wasn't easily brushed off. You're worried about the Hoa, aren't you? He asked. John nodded. It's just, they fined me $5. I know it's silly, but I don't like how they operate. I don't want them barging into the house or making a fuss. Mark nodded slowly. We'll handle it, Dad. Don't worry about it. John felt a wave of relief. Knowing Mark was there made a difference. His son had served overseas in challenging conditions, and he carried a sense of discipline and strength that John had always admired. Mark wasn't the type to panic or overreact, but he knew how to stand his ground. Later that afternoon, as John was reading a book on the porch, he noticed a car slowly drive past his house. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to pass by, but something about the way the car moved slow, deliberate made him uneasy. He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. Still, the feeling lingered. That night, John lay in bed thinking about what the next day might bring. He knew he couldn't ignore the fine, but he also didn't want to invite unnecessary confrontation. He resolved to call the Hoa in the morning and try to resolve the matter over the phone. Little did John know, the $5 fine was about to become more than just a minor inconvenience. It was about to set in motion a series of events that would test his patience, his composure, and ultimately, the bond between him and his son. The world outside his small home might have been filled with rules, fines, and petty disputes, but inside, John's home was a sanctuary. And he was determined to protect it, no matter what. As he drifted off to sleep, he didn't know that the next day would bring unexpected visitors, a tense confrontation, and a reminder that sometimes even the smallest things could have the biggest impact on one's life. The morning sunlight spilled over the Miller house, casting warm golden streaks across the neat lawn. John sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and staring at the $5 fine notice again. He tried to reason with himself. $5 wasn't a lot of money, yet it gnawed at him because of the principle. It wasn't about the money, it was about respect, about feeling like no one had the right to barge into his life over something so trivial. Mark, his son, was already awake, going through the morning routine with quiet precision. He made his own coffee, poured milk into a mug, and placed it on the counter for his father. John watched him, feeling reassured. There was something about Mark's calm confidence that made the world feel safer, even when absurd problems appeared. The tranquility of the morning shattered suddenly when John heard a low knock at the door. It wasn't the usual friendly greeting from a neighbor. This knock was sharp, almost commanding. John's heart skipped a beat. Mark looked up from the counter. "I'll get it," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a steel-like quality to it that immediately made John feel safer. Mark opened the door, and two men in plain clothes stepped onto the porch. They wore badges clipped to their belts and had an air of authority that immediately set John on edge. "Mr. Miller," one of them asked. His tone was polite, but firm. "That's me," John said, stepping closer to Mark. "We're here regarding the Hoa fine," the man continued. "We need to come inside and inspect the property." John blinked. "Inspect? For a $5 fine?" He felt a surge of disbelief. Mark stepped slightly in front of his father. "I think there's been a mistake," he said calmly. His presence was commanding. "We can resolve this in writing or over the phone." "You're not coming in." The men exchanged a glance. "We have authority to enter the property," one of them said. "We're just doing our job." John felt his stomach tighten. This was absurd. It was one thing to receive a letter. It was another to have strangers, claiming authority, insist on entering his home over $5. He looked at his son, hoping that Mark could handle the situation without it escalating. Mark's eyes were steady. "We're not allowing anyone inside, sir. You can leave, and we'll resolve the fine later." The men tried to argue, stepping closer to the door. "We have procedures," one said, clearly growing impatient. Mark didn't move. He simply shifted his stance, placing himself firmly between his father and the intruders. His military training was evident, not aggressive, but firm and controlled. He had been through situations far more dangerous than this, and he knew how to remain calm while asserting boundaries. John's mind raced. He had imagined petty arguments with the Hoa before, but never this. He could see the tension building, and he felt grateful for Mark's presence. One of the men sighed. "We just need to verify the placement of your trash cans," he said, pointing vaguely toward the side of the house. Mark's gaze didn't waver. "You can take pictures from outside. That's all you're getting. This is private property." The man hesitated. "We're allowed to inspect, not without permission," Mark interrupted. His voice was calm but absolute. "Step off the porch." John could feel his own pulse quicken. The absurdity of the situation was matched only by the tension. These men were clearly unprepared for someone standing their ground, someone who had the training and confidence to handle a confrontation without panic. The first man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. They were used to compliance, not firm resistance. "We'll leave for now," he muttered. "But the Hoa will follow up." Mark nodded slightly, letting them know that he understood the words but didn't feel threatened. As the men walked back to their car and drove away, John exhaled deeply. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with disbelief. "Thank you," John said, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Mark shrugged, a faint smile on his face. "It's nothing, Dad. I just want to make sure you're safe." Even after the men left, the tension lingered. John couldn't shake the feeling that the situation could return, and soon. The Hoa was not known for backing down, and he had no idea how far they might go over such a minor issue. Later that day, John called the Hoa, hoping to resolve the matter over the phone. He explained calmly that the trash cans had been properly placed and that a $5 fine seemed unnecessary. The person on the other end of the line was curt and dismissive, insisting that the fine stood and that further inspections could occur if it wasn't paid. John felt frustration rising again. He hung up the phone, feeling helpless but also resolved. He wasn't going to let strangers intimidate him in his own home. Mark watched quietly as his father paced the living room. "Don't let them get to you," he said gently. "We'll handle this together." John nodded, grateful for the reassurance. He realized that the problem wasn't the $5. It was the principle. It was the idea that someone could step into his life and assert authority over him, simply because they could. That night, John and Mark sat in the living room, talking quietly. They discussed the Hoa, the absurdity of rules, and the importance of standing up for oneself. For John, it was comforting to have Mark there. The world outside might be petty and intrusive, but inside their home, they could face it together. The next morning, the calm of the neighborhood was disrupted once again. John was sipping his coffee when a car slowly rolled past the front of his house. He frowned, feeling an uncomfortable familiarity. Could it be the same men from yesterday? He didn't know, but the thought made his heart race. Mark noticed his father's tension. "Don't worry about it, Dad," he said. "If anyone comes, we handle it together. You don't have to face this alone." John nodded, drawing strength from his son's presence. Even in the face of absurdity, there was comfort in knowing that he was not alone. By mid-morning, the day seemed to settle into routine, but the air of tension remained. John mowed the lawn and trimmed the hedges, but every sound outside made him pause and glance at the window. Mark kept a watchful eye as well, alert but calm, ready for any confrontation. In the afternoon, there was another knock at the door. John's heart skipped a beat. This time, it was not strangers. It was his neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who had heard about the situation. "John, I wanted to check on you," Mr. Thompson said. "I heard the Hoa sent people to your house yesterday. Are you all right?" John sighed in relief, grateful for a friendly face. "We're fine," he said. "It's just frustrating. A $5 fine shouldn't have led to this." Mr. Thompson nodded. "It's not about the money, really. It's about control. You did the right thing standing your ground." John looked at Mark, who gave a small nod. The tension in his chest eased slightly. He realized that even though the situation was absurd, it had brought him closer to his son. He had seen Mark's calm confidence, his ability to protect, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. As evening approached, John felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. He didn't know if the Hoa would try again, but he was no longer paralyzed by fear or frustration. With Mark by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. That night, John lay in bed reflecting on the day. The world outside his home was unpredictable and sometimes unreasonable, but he had learned something valuable. Standing together with family made even the most absurd challenges manageable. Little did John know, the next day would test this lesson further. The Hoa was not done, and the small $5 fine would escalate in ways he could not yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet of his home, surrounded by the presence of his son, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The next morning, the sun rose over the Miller house with a warm glow, but inside, the tension was palpable. John Miller moved slowly around the kitchen, trying to focus on breakfast, but his mind kept returning to the Hoa fine and the strangers who had come to his door. He had hoped yesterday's confrontation had been the end of it, but a nagging feeling told him that was unlikely. Mark was already in the living room, checking the front windows, his posture alert yet calm. He had learned long ago in the special forces that preparation and vigilance were the keys to managing tension. He didn't panic, and he didn't overreact. Instead, He positioned himself in the best spot to observe the front of the house and any approaching visitors. "Dad," Mark said quietly, not taking his eyes off the window, "if they come again, remember, stay calm. We're together, and nothing will happen as long as we keep our heads." John nodded, grateful for his son's presence. He felt a mixture of pride and relief. Mark was not only strong but also incredibly disciplined, capable of managing situations that would unsettle almost anyone else. As they were speaking, a car slowly approached down the street. This time, it was unmistakable. The same two men from yesterday stepped out, badges glinting faintly in the morning sun. Their expressions were serious, but there was an almost visible hesitation in their movements. John's stomach tightened. "They're back," he whispered. Mark nodded slightly. "I see them. Let's handle this carefully." The men walked up the sidewalk to the front door. One knocked sharply, while the other lingered near the car, occasionally glancing back as if expecting reinforcements. John opened the door cautiously. "Good morning," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "How can I help you?" The man in front stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, we are here to inspect your property regarding the Hoa fine. We need to come inside." John felt a wave of disbelief. "Inside? For $5? I don't understand." "You came yesterday," and Mark stepped beside his father, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. He stood tall, his eyes steady on the man. "No one is coming inside, sir. We can resolve this over the phone or with pictures." "That's it?" The man's jaw tightened. "We have the right to enter. It's part of our authority." Mark remained calm, but his tone was firm. "This is private property. You do not have the right to enter without permission. Step off the porch, or we will consider it trespassing." John felt a surge of pride and relief. His son had the kind of calm confidence that made even the most assertive people think twice. The men hesitated, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. One of the men glanced at his partner. "We're just doing our job," he said, his voice slightly defensive. "I understand," Mark replied. "But our property, our rules. You can take photos from the outside. That is all. We are not allowing entry." The men seemed to weigh their options. They had probably faced compliance from most residents, but Mark's calm authority created a barrier they weren't prepared to overcome. For several tense moments, no one spoke. The quiet hum of the neighborhood seemed louder than usual, highlighting the tension at the doorstep. John watched every movement, his heart racing. This was absurd, a $5 fine escalating into a standoff at his front door, but he also knew that his son's presence made a difference. He couldn't imagine handling this alone. Finally, one of the men sighed heavily. "We will leave for now," he muttered. "But the Hoa may follow up." Mark didn't respond immediately. He waited until the men had stepped off the porch before closing the door firmly. He locked it, ensuring that no one could enter without permission. John exhaled deeply, leaning against the door for support. "I don't know how you do it," he said quietly. "I would have panicked." Mark shrugged, giving a small smile. "You just have to stay calm, Dad. Fear makes people make mistakes. Confidence keeps you safe." For the next hour, John and Mark moved cautiously around the house. Every sound outside, the rustling of leaves, a distant car horn, even the wind felt amplified. The world outside had suddenly become unpredictable, and every small detail seemed to carry potential danger. By mid-morning, the tension began to ease slightly. John started to clean up the kitchen, putting away dishes, while Mark kept a quiet watch over the front yard. Their movements were synchronized, almost like a team that had worked together for years. Even in such an absurd situation, there was a sense of calm efficiency. Then, unexpectedly, the phone rang. John hesitated before answering. It was the Hoa office, but instead of a curt employee, the voice on the line sounded almost apologetic. "Mr. Miller," the voice began. We understand there was a misunderstanding regarding the fine. We apologize for the confusion. The matter has been resolved." John blinked, surprised. "Resolved? Just like that?" "Yes," the voice continued. "There will be no further inspections. We apologize for any inconvenience." John hung up, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. He turned to Mark, who had been silently observing. "I can't believe it," he said. "It's over." Mark nodded. "It's over for now. But remember, Dad, it wasn't the $5 that mattered. It was standing up, being prepared, and protecting yourself. That's what made the difference." John felt a deep wave of gratitude for his son. Mark had not only protected him physically but had also given him a sense of reassurance that words alone could not convey. He realized that the bond between them had grown stronger through this experience. As the day progressed, John began to relax. He mowed the lawn, trimmed the hedges, and even watered the flowers, feeling a sense of normalcy returning to his home. The absurdity of the situation had faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he and Mark had handled it together. In the evening, they sat on the porch, drinking tea and watching the sun dip behind the trees. John reflected on the events of the past 2 days. The Hoa fine, the confrontation, the tension, it had all been absurd. And yet, it had taught him something valuable about courage, preparation, and the strength of family bonds. Mark broke the silence. "Dad, sometimes life throws challenges at us that seem small but test us in ways we don't expect. Today, it wasn't the money. It was everything else. But we handled it, together." John smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "You're right, Mark. I've never been prouder of you." As darkness fell over the neighborhood, the Miller house felt safe and secure once again. The absurd challenge of a $5 fine had brought tension and uncertainty, but it had also strengthened the bond between father and son. In that quiet moment, John realized that the world outside might always be unpredictable, but inside his home, with his family, he could face anything. Little did John know, this experience would leave a lasting impression, reminding him that sometimes the smallest conflicts reveal the greatest strength and that family, courage, and calm determination could turn even the most absurd situation into a story of resilience. The morning after the confrontation, the Miller house felt unusually quiet. The sun rose slowly, casting gentle light over the neatly trimmed lawn and the small garden John had tended for years. For the first time in days, John felt a sense of calm. The tension that had gripped him since the Hoa notice had lifted, replaced by a quiet relief and a lingering sense of gratitude toward his son, Mark. John sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee slowly, trying to process everything that had happened. The $5 fine that had seemed so trivial at first had turned into a situation that tested his patience, his composure, and his trust in others. And through it all, Mark had been by his side, calm, strong, and unwavering. "I can't believe it's over," John said quietly, almost to himself. "All this stress for $5. It seems ridiculous now." Mark leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. It wasn't about the money, Dad, he said. It was about standing up for yourself. About protecting your space, your home. That's what really matters. John nodded, feeling the truth of his son's words settle in his chest. He had been so focused on the absurdity of the fine that he hadn't realized the deeper lesson. Life would always throw small challenges their way, some petty, some serious. How they responded would determine the strength of their family and their own resilience. Later that morning, John decided to step outside. He walked slowly around the yard, inspecting the flower beds and the trimmed hedges. Everything seemed in its place, yet he felt a subtle shift in the air. The confrontation with the Hoa had left a mark not just on him, but on the neighborhood. He realized that standing up for himself might have changed how neighbors viewed him. Perhaps they saw him as someone who could face challenges with dignity and calm. Mark joined him outside, carrying a small watering can. Together, they tended to the garden, a simple but grounding activity. The rhythmic motion of watering plants, trimming leaves, and adjusting flower pots helped John release some of the tension he had carried for days. The garden, once merely a hobby, had become a symbol of stability, a reminder that order and care could restore balance even after chaos. As they worked, Mrs. Harper from down the street approached, her smile warm and welcoming. "Good morning, John." "Mark," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I heard about the incident with the Hoa. Are you both all right?" John smiled, grateful for the friendly concern. "We're fine now, Mrs. Harper." It was unexpected, to say the least. She nodded knowingly. Sometimes these small conflicts reveal more than we expect. They show character, strength, and resilience. You both handled it well. Mark nodded politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. We just wanted to make sure Dad was safe." John felt a surge of pride as he watched his son interact with their neighbor. Mark's calm demeanor, his quiet confidence, and his natural authority were evident in everything he did. He had not only protected the house physically but had also shown respect and poise, setting an example of how to handle conflict with dignity. After Mrs. Harper left, John and Mark returned to their work in the garden. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the neighborhood began to stir. Neighbors waved from across the street, and John realized that life had returned to its usual rhythm. Yet, he noticed subtle changes: a few more smiles, a few extra nods of respect. Perhaps the events of the past days had reminded everyone that even small people could stand tall when necessary. By mid-afternoon, John and Mark were inside, sipping iced tea and reviewing some of their old family photos. The conversation drifted naturally to memories of Mark's time overseas. John listened intently as his son spoke of distant places, difficult challenges, and the discipline that had shaped him. Though Mark's stories were often serious and sometimes harrowing, John felt reassured. His son's strength, honed in the most demanding circumstances, was now a source of safety and guidance at home. "You know, Dad," Mark said thoughtfully, "facing this Hoa nonsense made me realize something. Even small conflicts can teach us big lessons. It's not always about danger or rules, it's about standing together, trusting each other, and staying calm no matter what." John nodded, understanding fully. "You're right. I was so focused on the fine and the rules that I didn't see the bigger picture. It's not the money or the letter, it's how we respond, how we protect our home and each other." As evening approached, John and Mark stepped out onto the porch to watch the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and gold, a quiet reminder that life, despite its challenges, continued with beauty and hope. They sat in silence for a few moments, letting the tranquility of the moment wash over them. Then, a car slowly rolled down the street, this time without any threat. John realized it was Mr. Thompson, one of their neighbors, stopping to chat. "Evening, John." "Evening, Mark," he said, tipping his hat. "I just wanted to say I'm glad everything's settled." "You handled that well." John smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It's a relief to have it over." Mark added, "It's taught us a lot about standing our ground and keeping calm." Mr. Thompson nodded, clearly impressed. "Sometimes the smallest things show the biggest strength. You both demonstrated that." After the neighbor left, John and Mark returned to the porch. John leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The absurdity of a $5 fine had turned into an opportunity for growth, reflection, and a deeper bond with his son. Over the next few days, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The hoa seemed to have backed down completely, and John felt a renewed sense of control over his life and home. Yet, he knew that the experience had changed him. He had learned that even in seemingly trivial matters, standing up for oneself mattered. More importantly, he had seen firsthand the strength and calm guidance of his son, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. One afternoon, John found himself sitting alone in the garden, reflecting on the events. He realized that fear and uncertainty often came from expecting the worst. By confronting the situation calmly, with preparation and presence of mind, they had turned what could have been a stressful ordeal into a manageable, even enlightening, experience. Mark joined him quietly, sitting on the garden bench beside his father. They didn't speak at first, simply enjoying the serenity of the moment. Then, Mark said, "Dad, you handled this well too. You stayed calm, trusted me, and faced it with dignity. That's important." John smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "I guess we make a good team," he said. "Even over something as ridiculous as a $5 fine." Mark chuckled softly. "Sometimes it's not the size of the problem that matters, it's how we respond together." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. John looked around, seeing the home, the garden, and his son sitting beside him. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The confrontation with the hoa had been unexpected, stressful, and absurd, but it had brought clarity, strengthened bonds, and shown that even the smallest challenges could reveal courage and resilience. That evening, John and Mark shared dinner quietly, speaking of ordinary things, plans for the weekend, upcoming repairs in the house, and neighborhood news. The absurd confrontation had faded into the background, replaced by the simple, comforting rhythm of daily life. Later, as John prepared for bed, he reflected on the lessons of the past week. Standing up for oneself didn't require aggression or anger, it required calmness, preparation, and trust in those who stood with you. He realized that Mark had not only protected him physically but had also guided him emotionally, teaching him a lesson he would never forget. Before turning off the light, John whispered softly to himself, "No matter what comes next, we'll face it together. That's what matters." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. The world continued its ordinary rhythm, yet the Miller house stood as a small beacon of calm resilience. Inside, a father and son had learned the value of trust, courage, and unity. The $5 fine, though trivial, had sparked an experience that neither of them would ever forget, a reminder that even in the smallest conflicts, strength and love could turn adversity into growth. And as John drifted off to sleep, he knew that no matter what challenges came their way, the bond he shared with Mark would guide them, protect them and help them face the world with calm confidence and unwavering trust. The days that followed the confrontation with the Hoa passed quietly at the Miller household. The small $5 fine that had caused so much tension seemed almost laughable now, but the experience had left a lasting mark on John and Mark. Life slowly returned to its normal rhythm, yet both father and son carried with them the lessons learned from those unusual days. John woke early, as he always did, and walked into the kitchen to find Mark already there, making coffee with his usual calm efficiency. The morning light spilled through the window, illuminating the small garden outside. Birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, and the world outside seemed peaceful. Yet John knew that peace was sometimes fragile, easily disrupted by the unpredictable nature of life. "Good morning, Dad," Mark said quietly, handing him a steaming mug of coffee. His eyes held that steady calm that had guided John through the confrontation. John smiled, taking a careful sip. "Morning, son. I was thinking about everything that happened last week. It feels surreal now." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It does. But I think it taught us something important. Life throws challenges at us in all sizes. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, like that fine. But the principle is the same: stay calm, stand together, and protect what matters." John agreed. "You're right. I was so focused on the absurdity of the fine that I didn't see the bigger lesson. It wasn't about the money at all, it was about how we respond." After breakfast, they stepped outside to tend to the garden. The flowers were blooming beautifully, and the neatly trimmed hedges stood proudly along the walkway. As they worked together, the rhythm of their movements created a quiet sense of unity. It wasn't just the garden being cared for, it was the home, their sanctuary, and the bond between father and son being strengthened. As they worked, several neighbors passed by. Some waved politely, while others stopped to chat. John noticed subtle changes in the way people looked at him. There was a newfound respect, an acknowledgement of the quiet strength he and Mark had displayed during the confrontation. Mrs. Harper approached with her usual warm smile. "I'm glad to see you both well," she said. "You handled the situation with such dignity. It could have been so much worse." John nodded, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. It was stressful, but we got through it together." Mark added, "It was really about staying calm and working together. That made all the difference." Mrs. Harper's eyes softened. "You've set a good example for the whole neighborhood. Sometimes people forget that small conflicts can reveal character and strength." Later that day, John and Mark sat on the porch, sipping iced tea and reflecting on the past week. John realized that the Hoa incident had been more than a simple annoyance. It had been a mirror, showing him how he and his son handled stress, conflict, and uncertainty. The experience had strengthened his trust in Mark and deepened his appreciation for the calm authority his son exuded. "You know, Dad," Mark said quietly, "I think experiences like this teach us about ourselves more than anything else. I saw how you stayed calm, even when it was stressful. That showed me a lot about your character." John smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "And I saw how you handled it, Mark. I've never been prouder of you. You weren't just protecting me, you were teaching me, too." The two sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip behind the trees, the sky painted with shades of orange and gold. It was a simple, beautiful scene, yet it carried a sense of closure and peace that John had not felt during the tension of the past days. As the week went on, John noticed subtle improvements in himself. He was more patient, more confident in standing his ground, and more aware of the importance of trust and preparation. The Hoa incident had been absurd, yes, but it had sparked growth and reflection that would remain with him long after the letters and fines were forgotten. Mark, too, found a quiet satisfaction in the resolution. He had returned home after years overseas, and the incident, though minor compared to his experiences, had given him an opportunity to guide his father and strengthen their bond. It reminded him that strength wasn't always measured in physical challenges. It could be demonstrated in calm decision-making, in standing firm with respect, and in protecting those you love. One afternoon, as John was mowing the lawn, Mark joined him, carrying a watering can. They moved together in a familiar rhythm, tending to the garden and the house with care. Their conversations were light, filled with plans for the weekend and discussions about small repairs and improvements around the house. It was ordinary, yet it felt meaningful, a quiet celebration of life returning to balance. In the evening, they invited a few neighbors over for coffee. It was a small gesture, but one that brought a sense of community and healing. They laughed, shared stories, and reflected on the absurdity of minor conflicts. John realized that this small gathering, born out of tension, had become a reminder of the importance of connection, understanding, and support in a neighborhood. Later, after the guests left, John and Mark sat on the porch once more. The stars were beginning to appear in the night sky, twinkling like distant reminders of possibility and hope. John felt a deep sense of gratitude not just for the resolution of the Hoa conflict, but for the bond he shared with his son, a bond strengthened by shared experience, trust, and mutual respect. "Dad," Mark said softly, "this week taught me something too. Even small challenges can reveal character, patience, and courage. And facing them with someone you trust makes all the difference." John nodded, feeling a tear prick the corner of his eye. "You're right, Mark. I've learned that. And I've learned that family, trust, and calm determination can turn even the most absurd challenges into lessons and growth." As the night deepened, they returned inside. John prepared for bed, feeling a sense of closure that he hadn't expected from such a small conflict. The $5 fine had caused tension, but it had also sparked reflection, strengthened family bonds, and reminded him of what truly mattered: patience, courage, and the people who stand by your side. Before turning off the light, John whispered softly, "No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." Mark, lying in his room down the hall, smiled quietly. The events of the week had reminded him that strength, courage, and love were not always measured in extraordinary acts. Sometimes, they were shown in simple, steady ways: in protecting a home, supporting family, and standing firm with calm confidence. In the following days, life settled into its ordinary rhythm. The Hoa remained at a distance, and the neighborhood continued its quiet routines. But the Miller house, and the bond between father and son, had been forever strengthened by a small $5 fine that had tested their patience, courage, and trust. John often thought about that week, smiling at the memory of the absurdity, the tension, and the calm resolution. He knew that no matter what challenges came their way in the future, he and Mark had learned a valuable lesson: stand together, stay calm, trust each other, and never underestimate the power of presence, preparation, and love. One afternoon, while John was tending to the flowers, Mark came out with a small notebook. "Dad, I've been writing down some lessons from the past week," he said. "Little reminders for us, so we don't forget what we learned." John chuckled. "That's a good idea. I think we'll need them. Life has a funny way of throwing challenges when we least expect it." They spent the afternoon together, writing notes about patience, courage, and standing firm. It was a simple exercise, yet deeply meaningful. They laughed at the memory of the $5 fine, the absurd confrontation, and the tension that had seemed so overwhelming at the time. But beneath the laughter was a quiet understanding of the growth, trust, and resilience they had gained. As the sun set once more, John and Mark sat on the porch, enjoying the evening breeze. The sky was painted with brilliant hues, reflecting the calm and balance they had restored in their home and in themselves. John felt a deep sense of contentment. The conflict was over, the lessons had been learned, and his bond with his son had grown stronger than ever. He realized that life's challenges, big or small, were opportunities to learn, reflect, and strengthen connections. Mark looked at his father, his eyes reflecting the same quiet confidence that had guided them through the past week. "Dad, whatever comes next, we'll face it together," he said. John smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. "Yes, Mark. Together." And in the quiet of the night, with the stars above and the world at rest, father and son sat side by side, knowing that they had not only overcome a small absurd challenge but had discovered the enduring strength of family, courage, and calm determination. The $5 fine had been insignificant in money, but monumental in lesson. It had reminded them that even the smallest conflicts could teach the greatest lessons, and that love, trust, and unity could turn any situation into an opportunity for growth and resilience. The Miller house stood quietly in the neighborhood, a small beacon of stability, courage, and the power of family bonds. And inside, John and Mark had discovered something far more valuable than any fine or letter could ever represent: a lasting bond, strengthened through trust, patience, and the shared experience of standing together.